The K'rax Vanguard Honor-Blade unit descended through the atmosphere of Sol 3 like a silent, invisible blade. They were a species that had survived millennia by adhering to a singular cultural philosophy: might makes right. For 300 standard years, they had expanded their dominion, absorbing 17 smaller civilizations and treating the galaxy as their personal hunting ground. To the Krax, other species were merely prey pretending to be predators. They had finally arrived at Earth, a planet classified as a Class 12 death world. Their intelligence reports suggested a world of nightmare, a planet where the gravity, the weather, and even the microbial life were designed specifically to cause maximum trauma. The Krax military commanders, legendary for their tactical precision, viewed this as the ultimate sporting challenge. They were elite killers, trained from birth in 17 different killing arts, and they cost more to equip than a small planetary defense system. The Honor-Blade unit, consisting of 12 Shadowborn-level assassins, launched their stealth insertion pods into the frozen wilderness of Siberia. They chose a night where the blizzard was at its peak, assuming the hostile environment would mask their approach. Their target was a lone, modest structure of wood and stone, built into the side of a mountain. According to their sensors, it housed a single, middle-aged human male, a primitive native ripe for a trophy harvest. They landed in a coordinated pattern, their cloaking technology making them invisible to all known scanning systems. The lead stalker, a veteran of 4 conquered systems, signaled for the unit to move in. He expected a terrified mammal cowering in the dark. He expected the easy conquest that had defined K'rax history. Instead, the K'rax found Marcus Thorne. He was not cowering. He was sitting on the front porch of the cabin, looking directly into the darkness toward the eastern approach, where the first K'rax pod had landed. Marcus was drinking from a ceramic mug, the steam rising into the sub-zero air. He looked relaxed, almost unbothered by the fact that 12 of the deadliest predators in the galaxy were currently surrounding his home. The lead stalker paused, his mandibles clicking in confusion. Humans were supposed to be the galaxy's favorite punching bag, a species that apologized when you stepped on their feet and said sorry when they were hurt. They were known for their seemingly infinite patience and their willingness to help anyone who asked. Marcus Thorne set his mug down with a soft click. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't shout for help. He simply took a long, slow breath through his nose. "You're early," Marcus said, his voice quiet and calm, the kind of tone that usually meant someone was about to get shoved out of an airlock. "I was hoping for another hour of peace before the Annoyance Protocol became necessary." The Krax lead stalker didn't understand. He didn't know about the stages of human behavior. He didn't know that Stage 1 was normal, friendly human patience. He didn't know that Marcus Thorne was a retired veteran of the Pacific conflict, an agent of a shadow organization with a $2 trillion budget dedicated to keeping Earth safe. As the 12 assassins tightened their circle, Marcus Thorne looked up at the sky and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile that showed too many teeth. The expression of a predator that had already calculated the outcome of the fight and found it acceptable. "Stage 2, Marcus whispered to the empty air. "I'm telling you, there's a problem." Before the Krax could strike, every single one of their stealth cloaks flickered and died. A high-frequency pulse, disguised as the hum of the blizzard, had just unmasked them. The hunters were no longer invisible. They were standing in the bright floodlights of a cabin that was suddenly bristling with more sensor arrays and hidden weapon systems than a Krax battlecruiser. Marcus Thorne picked up his mug again. "Now," he said, the smile tightening around the edges, "we're approaching Stage 3. The Krax unit stood frozen, not from the biting Siberian cold, but from the sudden, chilling realization that their tactical superiority had been a delusion. Lead stalker Vokrath watched as his most experienced scout, Krell, was neutralized in less than a heartbeat by what appeared to be a culinary byproduct. On Earth, a planet where the very atmosphere was considered corrosive to most species, humans had evolved to consume toxins for recreation. What Marcus Thorne had thrown was not a weapon in the traditional sense, but a liquid concentrated from the capsicum plant, a substance that, to a K'rax with sensitive sensory membranes, felt like liquid fusion. Marcus stood up from his chair, the wooden floorboards creaking under a weight that suggested he was wearing more than just civilian clothes. "Stage 3, he repeated, his voice devoid of the earlier warmth. "This is the point where the negotiation ends. You see, the K'rax have spent 3 centuries conquering civilized worlds. But you forgot that Earth didn't join the Galactic Council because we were looking for protection. We joined because we were looking for someone to talk to other than ourselves. Vokrath clicked a command for his remaining 10 assassins to engage their honor blades, plasma weapons that could slice through dreadnought hull plating. They lunged in a synchronized starburst formation, a maneuver that had never failed against 17 different species. They moved with a predatory grace, their reinforced exoskeletons providing the leverage to bridge the distance in milliseconds. Marcus Thorne didn't flinch. He simply stepped backward into the doorway of his cabin. As the first 3 Krax crossed the threshold of the porch, the primitive wood under their feet didn't break. It transformed. The floorboards slid aside to reveal a series of plasma spikes, powered by a localized fusion core hidden in the mountain's bedrock. 2 K'rax were instantly impaled, their high-tech armor offering no more resistance than tissue paper. "You think you're hunters?" Marcus's voice echoed from inside the dark cabin, now amplified by a tactical comm system. "You're just tourists. A real hunter doesn't just watch the prey. He becomes the environment." Vokrath's HUD began screaming warnings. His unit was being painted by multiple high-energy targeting locks, not from the cabin, but from the forest floor, the trees, and even the snow itself. The Shadowborn Assassins, legendary for their ability to hide in any terrain, were being tracked by thousands of microscopic, smart dust sensors that Marcus had seeded into the blizzard hours before they arrived. "Stage 4 is where I start getting annoyed," Marcus continued, and the lead stalker felt a wave of existential dread wash over his primary brain. "And when a human gets annoyed, we stop following the accords. We stop caring about acceptable casualties. We just solve the problem." Volkarath looked up as the blizzard was suddenly burned away by a pillar of white light. A massive human relentless class cruiser had dropped out of low orbit, its spinal cannon glowing with enough energy to glass a continent. "We call this the Janitor Protocol," a new voice, Admiral Okafor's, boomed over the Krax's internal frequencies. "Marcus wanted to see if you'd take the hint and leave. You didn't. Now he's actually getting annoyed. And we've brought the Varsity Team to help him clean up." As Marcus Thorne stepped back onto the porch, he was no longer holding a mug. He was holding a heavy-caliber Deathworlder rifle, and his eyes were locked on Volkarath with a terrifying, cold certainty. "Your fleet in orbit is currently being quarantined by our stealth frigates," Marcus said softly. "You have exactly 10 seconds to decide if you want to be a trophy or a footnote in a performance review." Volkarath raised his plasma blade, his warrior pride refusing to accept a draw. But then he heard a sound. Not from the ship above, but from the very mountain beneath him. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming, like a massive heart waking up. The cabin wasn't just a fortress. It was a capstone on something Earth had kept buried for 10,000 years, and the seal was finally breaking. Volkarath, the lead stalker of the K'rax Vanguard, watched in digitized horror as his tactical display turned into a graveyard of red icons. His unit, the legendary Shadowborn, were supposed to be the galaxy's deadliest weapons, each trained from birth in 17 killing arts and costing more to produce than a small planetary defense system. They possessed redundant organ systems that allowed them to survive wounds that would instantly drop any other species. Yet here they were, being systematically dismantled by a single human in a primitive wooden cabin. Marcus Thorne stepped fully onto the porch, the light from the orbital cruiser above casting his shadow long across the snow. He didn't move like a soldier, he moved like a man who had already solved a puzzle and was simply waiting for the pieces to realize they were stuck. "You see, Vokrath, your people have a doctrine based on overwhelming force and intimidation," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the localized jamming that had silenced the K'rax communications. "But Earth is a Class 12 death world. Everything here, from the gravity to the microbes, is trying to kill us every single day. We didn't become apex predators through strength or armor. We became apex predators through pure, terrifying persistence, and the kind of creative violence that comes from being the smallest thing in a nightmare." Vokrath lunged, his honor blade screaming with plasma energy. He was fast, but Marcus was already gone. It wasn't just speed, it was tactical prescience, a human specialty of calculating every possible move an opponent could make and countering them before they were even executed. As the alien leader's blade sliced through the air where Marcus had been, a series of pit traps opened beneath the remaining K'rax assassins. These weren't simple holes in the ground. They were elegant, ancient technology lined with plasma spikes, designed to neutralize even the most resilient Kravathi physiology. "That thrumming you hear?" Marcus asked, pointing a steady finger toward the mountain peak. "That's not a machine. That's a Titan. We have 52 of them locked away in containment sites across the globe. We kept them asleep because we preferred the mask of civilization. We preferred being the diplomats and the janitors of the galaxy." His smile grew colder, sharper. "But your High Council decided to bomb our cities. You decided that 3 billion human lives were an acceptable casualty for your sport. You woke the things we promised to never unleash." High above, the human relentless cruiser began its descent. This wasn't a trainee vessel, this was part of the Varsity Team, the actual military that humanity kept hidden, while the rest of the galaxy laughed at their training exercises. Admiral Okafor's voice crackled once more through Vokrath's failing helmet. "Lead Stalker, we've been running simulations on your fleet's performance since you entered the sector. You're currently ranked 14th on our training leaderboard, thus last place, right behind our junior ROTC space camp." Vokrath felt his mandibles tremble. It wasn't just the cold. It was the realization that his entire civilization was being treated as a teaching aid for human cadets. Marcus Thorne reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. "This is the trigger for the Annoyance Protocol," he said softly. "Stage 4. I've burned through my entire reserve of patience and I'm standing at the edge of the cliff." Suddenly, the mountain behind the cabin split open. From the wound in the earth, something made of living metal and burning with the light of a fusion reaction began to rise. It was 300 meters tall, a nightmare of human ancestry that shouldn't exist in a rational universe. "You wanted to hunt a Deathworlder?" Marcus asked, his voice now a low growl that mirrored the Titan's roar. "Congratulations! You've just found out what happens when the monsters we're usually hiding decide they want to play too." Marcus pressed the button. Across the planet, every single human military installation that had gone dark weeks ago suddenly blazed to life with energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. "Your fleet has 10 minutes to begin their jump sequence," Marcus said, echoing an ultimatum from a ghost of Earth's past. "After that, we stop being patient. We stop being polite. And we start solving the problem the efficient way." Vokrath looked at the Titan, then at the man who had defeated 12 of the Empire's best killers with a cup of coffee and some floorboards. He realized then that the most dangerous species in the galaxy wasn't the one that was always angry. It was the one that was almost never angry, but absolutely devastating when they finally got there. The K'rax lead stalker, Vokrath, stared upward, his optical sensors struggling to process the visual data of the entity rising behind the cabin. It was a Titan, a 300-meter-tall nightmare of living metal and fusion-burning eyes that humanity had kept locked away for millennia. Vokrath's tactical display was no longer providing solutions. It was flickering with unreadings, the same designation human sensors gave to reality-breaking phenomena. The lead stalker, who had conquered 17 civilizations, realized his shadow-born assassins were not just outmatched. They were irrelevant. Marcus Thorne stood in the center of the porch, the cold Siberian wind whipping around him, yet he remained perfectly still. "You see, Vokrath, your people think hunting is about the trophy," Marcus said, his voice now carrying a weight that made the alien scales click in involuntary terror. "You think it's about the stalk, the strike, and the kill. But humans come from a world where everything tried to kill us for millions of years. We didn't learn to hunt for sport. We learned to hunt because the alternative was extinction." Volkarath tried to raise his Honor-Blade, but his exoskeleton froze. A localized cyber attack had infiltrated his suit's systems, a demonstration of human tactical prescience. "Stage 5, Marcus continued, stepping off the porch and walking toward the paralyzed alien leader. "This is where the caregiver species reminds the galaxy that our diplomacy was a choice, not an inability to wage war. We spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war against ourselves before we ever looked at the stars." High above, the K'rax fleet was experiencing its own nightmare. The human relentless cruiser hadn't fired a single shot. Instead, it had deployed smart dust that convinced the K'rax ship reactors they were already in a state of meltdown. The K'rax captains were frantically trying to reboot systems, only to find their screens replaced by a human training leaderboard, where they were currently being mocked by cadets for their predictable tactical doctrine. "We've been practicing violence for far longer than we've been practicing diplomacy," Marcus said, stopping just inches from Vokrath's face. "We smile because we're happy, not because we don't have teeth. You mistake our table manners for weakness, but a surgeon knows exactly where your vital organs are, and the most efficient way to shut them down." The Titan behind the cabin let out a roar that wasn't just sound. It was a gravitational wave that shattered the K'rax insertion pods into scrap metal. The entity reached out a massive hand, not toward Vokrath but toward the sky, as if it could pluck the K'rax flagship directly out of orbit. Your High Council thought we were easy pickings because we negotiated and wrote treaties in 12 languages, Marcus whispered, his eyes locking onto Vokrath's yellow secondary eyes. But those treaties weren't for our protection. They were for yours. They were the only thing keeping the cages closed. Vokrath's comms crackled to life one last time with a message from his own high command. It wasn't an order to attack. It was a frantic, terrified scream for a retreat. The Krax had realized that humanity wasn't just one man in a cabin. It was a species that had converted its entire history of suffering into a weaponized logistics problem. The lesson for today, Lead Stalker, is simple, Marcus said, turning his back on the alien and walking back to his coffee mug. Never judge a species by how they act in peacetime. Because when the janitor gets annoyed, he doesn't just clean the room. He removes the trash permanently. As the Titan's hand began to glow with the same blue plasma that had vaporized K'rax dreadnoughts in human simulations, Marcus picked up his mug. He looked at the countdown on his tactical watch. 9 minutes remaining, Marcus noted, and I'm still very, very annoyed. High above the frozen Siberian peaks aboard the K'rax hive ship Blade of Glory, High Commander Vrex watched his tactical display with a growing sense of existential dread. For centuries, the K'rax had been the galaxy's premier hunters, treating entire civilizations as easy pickings. But now, 3,000 of the finest K'rax warships were being held in check by a human fleet that had appeared out of cold stealth. Vrex's sensor officers were frantic, reporting that the human vessels weren't just ships. They were tactical prescience manifested in steel. Every move the K'rax fleet made had already been countered. Every fallback position was already occupied by human Varsity Team interceptors. "Launch the Obsidian Guard," Vrex roared, his mandibles clicking with a volume born of desperation. "If we cannot take the planet, we will glass it from orbit." But before the command could even clear the ship's internal processors, the main view screen flickered. It didn't show the battle, it showed the bridge of the human flagship Relentless. Admiral Patricia Okafor sat there, not in a battle stance, but leaning back with a look of exhausted certainty. "High Commander Vrex," Okafor began, her voice calm in a way that promised future violence. "My officer on the ground, Marcus Thorne, has officially activated the Annoyance Protocol. Stage 5. For the last 73 cycles, we have played the role of the galaxy's janitors and caregivers. We smiled, we negotiated, and we wrote treaties in 12 languages just to avoid conflict. You mistook our preference for peace as an inability to wage war." Vrex bristled, his scales shifting to an embarrassed purple. "You are primitives. Deathworlders playing with fire. We are survivors of a planet that actively tries to murder us every single day," Okafor countered, her eyes hardening into something that reminded Vrex of compressed neutronium. "We learned to be diplomats because the alternative, our natural state, is far too efficient at destruction. You came to our home and interrupted a man's retirement. Now we're done asking nicely." On the planet's surface, Vokrath watched as the sky itself seemed to ignite. The Obsidian Guard pods he had prayed for were not landing. They were being vaporized in the upper atmosphere by sympathetic frequency harmonics. Marcus Thorne checked his watch, the blue light of the Titan behind him casting a ghostly glow over the snow. 7 minutes, Vokrath," Marcus said quietly. "You're still thinking like a warrior, obsessed with honor and trophies. But humans? We're persistence hunters. We don't need to be faster than you. We just need to never stop. We've already calculated your supply lines, your fuel consumption, and the exact moment your reactor will fail. We didn't defeat you through courage. We defeated you through accounting." Marcus turned his gaze toward the massive Titan. The entity's fusion eyes locked onto the Blade of Glory in orbit. It didn't need a cannon. It began to hum, a sound that vibrated the very molecular bonds of the K'rax flagship. Vokrath realized with a chill that the humans hadn't just built a military. They had weaponized the nightmare world itself. "You see," Marcus whispered, stepping closer to the paralyzed lead stalker, "we're not trapped here with you. You're trapped on a Class 12 death world with us." And the janitor just found a very large mess to clean up. Suddenly the Blade of Glory began to descend, not in a controlled flight, but as if the planet's gravity had reached out to claim it. The Titan let out a roar that wasn't just sound, it was a declaration of existence that shattered every window in the cabin. Vokrath looked at Marcus, then at the sky, and realized that for the first time in Krax history, the hunter had become the prey. The Blade of Glory, a 3-kilometer-long monument to K'rax military arrogance, was no longer behaving like a spaceship. Caught in the gravitational tether of the mountain-dwelling Titan, its structural integrity was failing. On the ground, Vakrath watched through his cracked visor as the massive vessel was dragged through the clouds like a hooked fish. The sound was a symphony of screaming metal, a noise that Marcus Thorne seemed to find almost meditative as he leaned against a porch pillar, his rifle resting casually in the crook of his arm. "You're wondering how we did it," Marcus said, his voice easily piercing the roar of the atmospheric disturbance. "How a primitive species managed to tractor-lock a hive ship using nothing but a geological formation and a bad attitude." He gestured toward the Titan, which was now pulsing with a rhythmic golden light. "It's not magic, Vakrath. It's biology. The Titans aren't machines we built. They're the reason humanity survived the first extinction events. We didn't just climb to the top of the food chain on Earth. We made a deal with the things that were already there." Vakrath's secondary brain was frantically trying to process the data streaming from the hive ship's dying computers. The human Varsity Team in orbit wasn't even firing their main cannons. Instead, they were broadcasting a humanity debt file to every K'rax frequency. It was a 300-year ledger of every diplomatic insult, every stolen colony, and every caregiver mission humans had performed for the K'rax without asking for anything in return. "We call this the consultation." Admiral Okafor's voice returned, now cold and clinical. "For 3 centuries, we've been your doctors and your mechanics. We've seen your biology under a microscope. We know your genetic weaknesses better than your own scientists do. We chose to be peaceful because we found violence to be unprofessional. But you've forced us to go back to our roots." Marcus stepped off the porch, walking slowly toward the paralyzed lead stalker. "Stage 6 is where we stop the annoyance and start the extraction. You see, Vakrath, on Earth, we have a saying. The surgeon knows exactly where the heart is, but the butcher knows how to make it stop beating. You came here looking for a trophy, but all you've done is provide us with the biological data we need to ensure the K'rax Vanguard never leaves their home system again." A series of stealth dropships, invisible until they were meters from the ground, began to decloak around the perimeter. These weren't filled with soldiers, but with orderlies, human specialists in powered surgical combat armor. They didn't carry rifles. They carried high-frequency nerve blockers and containment units. "You're not going to die today, Vakrath," Marcus said, kneeling beside the alien leader. "That would be too easy. You're going to be quarantined. We're going to study how a species with so much tactical potential could be so catastrophically stupid. And while we're doing that, our fleet is moving toward your homeworld." Volkarath's optical sensors flared. "You would attack our families?" "No," Marcus replied, his eyes flashing with a predatory intensity. "We're persistence hunters, remember? We don't destroy, we just take over the environment. By the time your High Council realizes what's happening, every K'rax military installation will be a human-managed medical facility. You wanted to hunt us? Congratulations! You've just become our longest-running patient." As the orderlies moved in, Marcus looked at the countdown on his watch. 0. The Titan let out a final bone-shaking roar and the Blade of Glory vanished from the sky, not in an explosion, but into a localized spatial fold that the humans had presciently placed right in its path. "Now," Marcus said, standing up and dusting off his jacket, "let's go see what your High Council has to say about their discharge papers." The Krax High Council chamber, usually a theater of predatory pride and territorial expansion, was submerged in a silence so absolute it felt physical. On the central holographic display, the wreckage of the Blade of Glory wasn't burning. It was being meticulously disassembled by human engineering drones in a process that looked more like an autopsy than salvage. Vakrath, the once feared lead stalker, sat in a containment field on the bridge of the human flagship, watching his empire's military legacy be reduced to a series of spreadsheets and probability matrices. High Commander Vrex, speaking from the K'rax homeworld, stared at the image of Admiral Patricia Okafor. "You have humiliated our finest warriors," Vrex hissed, though his mandibles trembled with the realization that his civilization was facing an existential crisis. "You speak of quarantine and discharge papers as if we are children playing with weapons." "You were children playing with weapons," Okafor replied, her tone lacking any trace of heat. We've been watching you stumble around the galaxy for 3 centuries, treating other species like prey. We hoped you would grow out of it. We hoped our patience would give you the time to develop a conscience. But you mistook our silence for absence and our kindness for weakness. On the screen behind her, Marcus Thorne appeared, now back in his cabin, calmly cleaning his rifle. "Here is the final tally, Vrex," Marcus said, not looking up from his work. "Your invasion cost us 3 billion in property damage and a very good coffee mug. In return, we have neutralized your hive ship, paralyzed your obsidian guard, and mapped every tactical weakness in your genetic code. We didn't do this because we hate you. We did it because you were getting annoying." Okafor presented the discharge papers, the Treaty of Sol 3. It wasn't a surrender document, it was an assimilation protocol. The K'rax Vanguard would not be destroyed. Instead, they would be integrated into the Earth Defense Fleet as allied peacekeepers. They would be given respect, a purpose larger than conquest, and the guidance of the galaxy's most persistent predators. "You have 2 options," Okafor stated, echoing a choice given to many before. "You withdraw all forces from neutral space and accept human administrative guidance, or we continue this conversation with the Titans. If our military has to show up again, it won't be for talking." Vrex looked at the mathematics. The humans had calculated his supply lines, his fuel consumption, and the exact moment his people would run out of resources to resist. It was a victory achieved through accounting and surgical precision. He realized then that every enemy of humanity either ceased to exist or became a close ally within 5 years. There was no middle ground in human military doctrine. "We accept," Vrex whispered, his scales fading to a dull, resigned gray. As the Krax fleet began its jump sequence toward the designated integration waypoints, Marcus Thorne stepped back onto his porch in Siberia. The Titan had submerged back into the mountain, the ancient seal once again closing tight over the nightmares of Earth's past. The janitor had finished his work, and the environment was once again under control. "You did the right thing, Vakarath," Marcus said to the captured lead stalker through the comms. "It's much better than the alternative. Just remember, we're not diplomats because we've evolved past violence. We're diplomats because we know exactly what happens when we stop being patient." Marcus picked up a new mug, a gift from the Varsity Team in orbit, and watched the stars. The galaxy had learned its lesson, one summit at a time. The age of the warrior was ending, and the age of the annoyed was just beginning. "Stay safe, Vakarath," Marcus added with a faint, teeth-showing smile. "And try not to make me kill you next time. I'm starting to enjoy my retirement." The aftermath of the Sol 3 incident rippled through the Galactic Council like a shockwave through a vacuum. The K'rax Vanguard, once the most feared hunters in 17 star systems, were now the first patients in a galaxy-wide restructuring of power. Following the Annoyance Protocol, which had now been officially codified into interspecies law, every major civilization updated its diplomatic guidelines with a singular, terrifying directive. If a human says they are getting annoyed, you stop and fix the problem immediately. The discharge papers presented to the K'rax High Council were not merely a treaty, but a transformation of their entire culture from predators into participants in a system they had previously mocked. In the months following the integration, the galaxy began to understand the true depth of human patience. The Krax found that serving alongside the Terran Defense Fleet was not a sentence of slavery, but an education in tactical prescience and positive-sum cooperation. They learned that humans had spent decades secretly preparing for the possibility of galactic contact, building secret militaries with budgets that rivaled entire imperial economies. The human Varsity Team was no longer a myth. It was a visible reality that sat quietly in the back row of every council session, watching everything and helping where needed. Marcus Thorne remained in his Siberian cabin, though his retirement was now a matter of galactic legend. On his front porch, beside the spot where he had once calmly sipped coffee while surrounded by assassins, stood a new plaque that had become a pilgrimage site for diplomatic attachés. "Welcome. Please don't make me kill you." He continued to file his waste reclamation reports and agricultural assessments, a reminder that humans preferred being economists and caregivers over being monsters. The final lesson humanity delivered was the most profound. They were not diplomats because they lacked the capacity for violence, but because they understood the cost of it too well. They had evolved in a hell of their own making on a Class 12 death world, and they had chosen to be better than their history. As Admiral Okafor noted in her final report to the Council, humanity genuinely preferred peace, but kindness was never to be mistaken for weakness. As the stars continued their eternal dance, the galaxy settled into a new, annoyingly solid stability. The age of warrior cultures had ended, and the age of accountants with warships had begun. Marcus Thorne took one last look at the long-range sensors, seeing a galaxy that had finally learned to knock before entering. He picked up his mug, smiled a tired but satisfied smile, and enjoyed the silence. The caregiver species was still there, patient and watchful, hoping they would never have to stop being nice again.